Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., Marcus Sullivan's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips as the German Shepherd emerged from the Montana wilderness like a specter. The canine sat motionless in knee-deep snow, amber eyes locked on the abandoned Thompson house with an intensity that made Marcus's war-scarred soul ache. This wasn't just any stray dog. This was a federal working animal. Martha Henderson's walker clattered against her porch railing as she gasped, binoculars slipping from her arthritic fingers. Frank Patterson's newspaper scattered across the frozen ground, his weathered face pale with recognition of something terribly wrong. Marcus remembered his own son Danny's laugh echoing through these same woods 5 Christmases ago, before the drunk driver stole everything that mattered. Now this mysterious canine kept the same vigil Marcus held at his boy's grave, waiting for someone who would never come home. "Call the sheriff," Marcus whispered, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. What had that dog been guarding for 3 years, and why did those amber eyes hold the same haunted desperation Marcus saw in his own mirror each morning? Leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Sullivan stood 6 feet tall but felt smaller every day since the world took everything from him. At 52, the former Army canine handler carried himself like a man perpetually braced for the next blow. His calloused hands, once steady enough to defuse roadside bombs in Afghanistan, now trembled each morning as he measured coffee grounds into his dented percolator. The disability check from Veterans Affairs, $1,847 each month, barely covered rent on the drafty cabin he called home in Glacier Falls, Montana. The mountain town of 2,400 souls huddled against the Canadian border like refugees from civilization. When the copper mine closed 3 years ago, half the young folks packed up for Denver or Seattle, leaving behind the stubborn, the broke, and the broken. Marcus fit all 3 categories. He'd come here seeking what his VA counselor called therapeutic isolation, a fancy term for running away from memories that followed him anyway. His kitchen table bore the archaeology of a shattered life, unopened condolence letters, Danny's Little League trophy collecting dust, and a framed photo he couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't bring himself to pack away. 5 years ago, on December 20th, a drunk driver had stolen his 12-year-old son on the way home from basketball practice. 2 years later, his wife Sarah packed her grief in cardboard boxes and drove away, leaving behind only the echo of her final words. "I can't watch you drown anymore, Marcus. I'm already underwater myself." The German Shepherd appeared 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, materializing from the snow-heavy pines like something from a fever dream. Every morning at dawn, every evening at dusk, the dog maintained its silent vigil at the abandoned Thompson house. The Victorian-era structure sat on 5 acres of overgrown wilderness, its paint peeling like sunburned skin, windows dark as dead eyes. David Thompson, a social worker down in Billings, had inherited the place from his great-aunt, but couldn't afford the upkeep on his $47,000 in student loans. Martha Henderson, 78 and sharp as winter wind, lived next door in a house that had sheltered 4 generations of her family. Her Social Security check of $892 forced her to choose between heating and groceries most months, but she'd rather freeze than accept charity. Frank Patterson, the retired high school English teacher, occupied the cabin on the other side of Marcus. At 71, Frank carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd taught Shakespeare to 3 generations of ranch kids and buried his beloved wife Ruth to cancer the previous spring. "In my day, we didn't let animals suffer," Martha had declared that first morning, bundled in 3 coats and wielding her walker like a weapon against the world's indifference. But there was something about this particular dog that gave even the toughest old-timers pause. Something in its posture, its unwavering focus, its military straight spine that spoke of training far beyond any farm dog's education. The amber eyes held secrets that Marcus recognized from his own sleepless nights, and every instinct he'd honed in 2 decades of military service screamed that this was no ordinary stray. The morning of December 15th broke clear and bitter, with temperatures plunging to -15 degrees Fahrenheit. Marcus stepped onto his porch at exactly 6 a.m., clutching his steaming coffee mug like a lifeline. The ritual had become sacred, his only remaining anchor to the disciplined routine that once defined his military life. Steam rose from the dark liquid in ghostly spirals, dissipating into air so cold it made his lungs ache. That's when he saw them. Fresh paw prints in the virgin snow, each impression the size of a man's palm, leading in a straight line toward the Thompson property. The tracks were too large for a coyote, too purposeful for a wandering dog. Marcus set down his mug and followed the trail, his boots crunching through the crystalline silence. The German shepherd sat like a statue carved from shadow and snow, positioned exactly 20 feet from the Thompson house's front gate. Its thick sable coat, layers of gray and silver that would have blended perfectly with the winter forest, was matted but clean. The dog's amber eyes never wavered from a specific second-floor window, as if watching for someone who would never appear. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't the posture of a lost pet or feral scavenger. The dog's spine was military straight, shoulders squared, head held at the precise angle he'd seen in countless canine units. Every fiber of Marcus's being screamed recognition. This was a working dog, trained for federal service. "Sweet Jesus," came Martha Henderson's voice from behind him. She'd navigated her walker across the treacherous snow, bundled in so many layers she resembled a walking quilt. "That poor creature's been out there since Thanksgiving morning. I see him from my kitchen window every day, rain or shine, never moving from that exact spot." Marcus raised his binoculars, military-grade Steiner glasses he'd carried through 2 deployments. Through the lenses, he studied the dog's behavior with professional scrutiny. The animal maintained perfect discipline, never fidgeting, never breaking focus. Its breathing created small clouds in the frigid air, each exhale a metronome of patience that spoke of extensive training. "Ma'am, look at how he holds himself," Marcus said, his voice rough with recognition. "That's not random positioning. See how his front paws are perfectly aligned? That's a trained watch command. Somebody taught this dog to guard something specific." Frank Patterson emerged from his cabin, newspaper tucked under his arm, drawn by their voices. At 71, the retired teacher moved with the careful dignity of a man whose mind remained sharp, even as his body betrayed him. "I've been wondering about our 4-legged sentry myself," Frank said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Been observing him for weeks. He follows a precise schedule. Arrives at 6 a.m., maintains position until 8 a.m., disappears into the woods, returns again at 6 p.m. for another 2-hour shift." Martha pulled her knitted scarf tighter against the wind. "In my day, we didn't let animals suffer like this. But there's something about that dog that makes me hesitant to call animal control. Something almost human about his dedication." Marcus lowered his binoculars, his mind racing through possibilities. "Frank, you mentioned strange activity at the Thompson house a few years back. What exactly did you see?" The older man's expression darkened. 3 years ago, maybe 4, there was significant federal activity here. FBI vehicles, agents in suits asking questions about the previous owners. Then suddenly everything stopped. No explanation, no follow-up. "Bobby Mitchell, he was police chief then, told everyone it was a false alarm, some paperwork mix-up." "Bobby Mitchell," Marcus repeated, filing the name away. The wealthy businessman owned half the buildings in Glacier Falls, his construction company responsible for most of the town's modern infrastructure. a pillar of the community, always organizing charity drives and community events. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched the dog's routine continue with clockwork precision. At exactly 8 a.m., the German Shepherd rose, circled the house 3 times in a clockwise pattern, then melted back into the forest like smoke. The behavior was too specific, too ritualized to be random. That afternoon, Marcus filled 2 bowls, one with fresh water, another with high-quality dry food from his emergency supplies. He approached the Thompson property cautiously, reading the dog's body language for signs of aggression or fear. The German Shepherd watched his approach with intelligent amber eyes but showed no hostility, only wariness born of experience. Marcus placed the bowls just inside the rusted gate and stepped back. "Easy, boy," he murmured, using the same tone that had calmed countless military working dogs. "I know you're on duty, just looking out for a fellow soldier." The dog's ears perked forward at the word soldier, and for one brief moment its tail gave the faintest wag, the first sign of life Marcus had witnessed. Then discipline reasserted itself, and the animal returned to its vigil. As Marcus walked away, he found a torn piece of blue fabric caught on the gate's metal bars, stained with something dark that made his stomach clench with recognition. Marcus spread the torn blue fabric across his kitchen table under the harsh glare of his desk lamp, studying the material with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through 2 combat deployments. The weave was synthetic, heavy-duty, with reinforced stitching along one torn edge. More troubling were the dark stains that had oxidized to rust brown. Stains he recognized from too many battlefield encounters. Using an old magnifying glass he'd inherited from his grandfather's toolkit, Marcus examined the fabric more closely. Embedded in the fibers were traces of what looked like official patches, the kind sewn onto federal uniforms. His hands trembled as he reached for his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard before typing FBI Uniform Specifications 2020. The search results confirmed his worst fears. The fabric matched exactly with standard-issue FBI field jackets, the kind worn by tactical teams and K-9 units. The blood traces were old, at least 3 years based on the oxidation pattern. Someone had died wearing this uniform, and that German Shepherd had been guarding the secret ever since. A sharp knock at his door interrupted his investigation. Marcus instinctively reached for the service pistol he kept in his kitchen drawer, old habits from a life where unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. Through the window, he saw Bobby Mitchell's imposing silhouette, the businessman's expensive winter coat making him look like a prosperous undertaker against the snow. "Marcus!" Bobby's voice carried the hearty boom of a man accustomed to being welcomed everywhere. "Heard you've been playing Good Samaritan with our neighborhood stray. Thought I'd bring some supplies to help out." Bobby entered without waiting for invitation, carrying a bag from the local pet store and a thermos of what smelled like expensive coffee. At 48, Robert Mitchell commanded respect through sheer presence, 6 feet 2 inches of carefully maintained authority, silver hair perfectly styled, handshake firm enough to crack knuckles. His success in construction had made him Glacier Falls' unofficial mayor, the man people turned to when problems needed solving. "Appreciate the thought, Bobby," Marcus said carefully, positioning himself between his guest and the evidence spread across the table, "though I'm not sure that dog belongs to anybody around here." Bobby's keen gray eyes swept the cabin's interior, cataloging details with the thoroughness of a man accustomed to assessing situations quickly. "Funny thing about strays," he said, settling into Marcus's only decent chair without invitation. "Sometimes they show up carrying more baggage than you'd expect. Had a German Shepherd myself a few years back." "Beautiful animal. Reminded me of my daughter Emma before we lost her." The mention of Bobby's daughter created an uncomfortable silence. Everyone in Glacier Falls knew the story. 8-year-old Emma Mitchell had vanished during a family camping trip 15 years ago. Her body never found despite massive search efforts. The tragedy had transformed Bobby from a carefree young father into the driven, somewhat obsessive community leader he'd become. "I'm sorry for your loss," Marcus said, meaning it. The kinship of bereaved fathers created an instant, painful bond between them. "You understand, then," Bobby continued, his voice softening with genuine emotion, "how a man changes when he loses a child, how he might start seeing threats everywhere, conspiracies in every shadow. The federal boys came through here 3 years ago, stirring up all kinds of theories about trafficking networks and organized crime. Had the whole town spooked for months." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of theories?" Bobby waved dismissively, but his eyes remained sharp and calculating. "The usual federal nonsense. Claimed they had evidence of some kind of operation targeting children from rural communities. Spent weeks crawling through everyone's business, interrogating good people like they were criminals. Then one day they just disappeared, packed up overnight without so much as a goodbye. And the investigation? Closed. Officially they found nothing. Unofficially?" Bobby leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I think they realized they'd been chasing ghosts. Sometimes grief makes people see monsters where there are only shadows, Marcus. You know that better than most." The comment hit like a physical blow, dredging up memories Marcus had spent years trying to suppress. After Danny's death, he'd seen threats everywhere, convinced that random accidents were actually targeted attacks, that his son's death was part of some larger conspiracy. The paranoia had nearly destroyed his marriage and his sanity. "Maybe you're right," Marcus conceded, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Still, that dog's behavior bothers me. Too disciplined for a stray, too focused for a pet." Bobby stood, his smile never wavering, but something cold flickering behind his eyes. "You military guys, always looking for the mission that isn't there. Sometimes a lost dog is just a lost dog, Marcus. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is dig where you shouldn't be digging." After Bobby left, Marcus sat in his kitchen, staring at the fabric evidence, his mind churning with possibilities. The businessman's visit felt too convenient, too perfectly timed. The warning about digging had been delivered with the subtle menace of a man accustomed to having his advice followed. That evening, Marcus watched from his window as the German Shepherd resumed its vigil. Under the harsh glare of the security light Bobby's company had installed last year, the dog looked even more spectral, more purposeful. Its amber eyes reflected the light like twin flames, never wavering from that second-floor window. At exactly 8 p.m., Marcus witnessed something that made his blood run cold. A figure moved past the supposedly empty house's window, just a shadow, but distinctly human. The Thompson house wasn't abandoned at all. Someone was living there, watching, waiting. The German Shepherd's vigil suddenly made terrible sense. It wasn't guarding the memory of dead owners or lost handlers. It was maintaining surveillance on an active threat, waiting for backup that had never come. Marcus reached for his phone to call the sheriff, then hesitated. Bobby Mitchell had been police chief 3 years ago when the federal investigation disappeared. How many other local officials might be compromised? For the first time since Danny's death, Marcus felt the familiar weight of a mission settling on his shoulders. Whatever had happened 3 years ago, whatever that dog had witnessed, the truth was still buried somewhere in the shadows of Glacier Falls. And someone very powerful wanted it to stay buried. The next morning arrived with the promise of the season's worst blizzard, meteorologists predicting 30 inches of snow and winds gusting to 60 miles per hour. Marcus woke before dawn, his military-trained internal clock pulling him from dreams where Danny's voice called out warnings he couldn't quite understand. Coffee steamed in his thermos as he positioned himself at the kitchen window, binoculars focused on the Thompson house. At exactly 6 a.m., the German Shepherd emerged from the tree line. But today, something was different. The dog moved with obvious pain, favoring its left rear leg, and Marcus could see fresh scratches along its muzzle through his binoculars. Someone or something had hurt this animal recently, and the knowledge ignited a rage in Marcus that surprised him with its intensity. "Thor," he whispered, the name emerging unbidden from some deep recognition. "That's what I'll call you, boy." Thor. As if sensing the name, the dog's ears perked up, and for one impossible moment it seemed to look directly at Marcus through the window. Then discipline reasserted itself, and Thor resumed his vigilant watch of the house. Martha Henderson's voice startled him from behind. "Mercy, you gave me a fright." She stood in his doorway, having let herself in with the spare key he'd given her for emergencies. "Brought you some of my famous cinnamon rolls, and figured we should have ourselves a proper war council about our four-legged friend." Frank Patterson followed close behind, carrying a manila folder thick with papers. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion, Marcus, but Martha convinced me to share what I've been researching about our mysterious dog and the Thompson property." The three of them gathered around Marcus's kitchen table, the warmth of fresh-baked goods creating an odd counterpoint to the grim evidence they were assembling. Frank opened his folder with the methodical care of a man who'd spent 40 years organizing lesson plans. "I've been corresponding with some old colleagues from my teaching days," Frank began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Turns out the federal investigation 3 years ago wasn't the fishing expedition Bobby Mitchell claimed. Agent Danny Sullivan was the lead investigator, and he had significant evidence of a child trafficking network operating through our region." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Danny Sullivan? You know the name?" Martha asked, her sharp eyes missing nothing. It was my son's name," Marcus managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "My boy who died 5 years ago." Frank's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry, son. Coincidences like that can cut deep. But here's what troubles me. Agent Sullivan disappeared during the investigation. Officially, he was transferred to another case, but my friend at the Bureau says there's no record of where he went. It's like he just vanished." Martha reached across the table to squeeze Marcus's hand with fingers gnarled by arthritis, but warm with genuine affection. "That dog's been waiting for someone, honey. Waiting for 3 long years. What if he's been waiting for Agent Sullivan to come back?" The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Agent Danny Sullivan had disappeared 3 years ago, and Thor had been maintaining this vigil ever since, then the dog wasn't just guarding a memory. He was guarding evidence. Evidence that someone had killed to protect. "There's more," Frank continued, pulling out a series of newspaper clippings. "I've been tracking missing children reports from across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming over the past 5 years. The pattern is subtle but consistent. Rural families often struggling financially, children who disappear without a trace, families who receive anonymous donations shortly after the disappearances." Marcus studied the clippings, his trained eye picking out details that civilian investigators might miss. These aren't random kidnappings. Someone's targeting specific demographics. Families in financial distress, children who might not be immediately missed if the parents received enough money to relocate and start over. "That's what I thought too," Frank said grimly. "And here's the connection that chills my blood. Bobby Mitchell's construction company built facilities in all these communities within the past decade. Emergency shelters, community centers, even private residences for at-risk families." Martha's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied rouge. "You're saying Bobby Mitchell is involved in stealing children?" "I'm saying the evidence points to a sophisticated operation using legitimate businesses as cover," Marcus replied, his military training taking over the emotional turmoil. Someone with connections to law enforcement, construction capabilities, and enough financial resources to make problems disappear. The morning progressed with mounting tension as they compiled their evidence. Frank had managed to obtain building permits showing Bobby's company had constructed underground storage facilities at several properties, including the Thompson house. Martha contributed her detailed observations of unusual vehicle traffic over the past 3 years. Expensive cars with out-of-state plates arriving at odd hours, always when most townspeople would be asleep. At noon, Marcus made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I'm going to establish contact with Thor properly. If that dog was Agent Sullivan's partner, he might lead me to evidence we need. Marcus, honey, that's dangerous, Martha protested. If Bobby Mitchell really is involved in this and he finds out you're investigating, then he finds out, Marcus said with a finality that silenced the room. Some things are worth the risk, Martha. Children's lives are worth the risk. The blizzard was intensifying as Marcus approached the Thompson property, snow already beginning to accumulate in dangerous drifts. Thor watched his approach with intelligent amber eyes, and Marcus felt that strange recognition again. This wasn't just any K9, this was a partner waiting for his handler to return. Easy, Thor, Marcus said softly, using the name that felt increasingly right. I know you're on duty, boy. I know you're waiting for Danny. But Danny's not coming back, is he? At the mention of Danny, Thor's ears shot forward and he whined, the first vocal sound Marcus had heard from the dog. The animal's tail wagged once, tentatively, as if testing whether this stranger understood the significance of that name. Marcus knelt in the snow, pulling out a photograph he'd brought from his wallet. A picture of himself and his own Danny at a military K9 demonstration years ago. This was my Danny, Thor. He would have grown up to be just like your partner. Would have wanted to protect kids the way Agent Sullivan did. Thor approached cautiously, sniffing the photograph with the thorough investigation of a trained detection dog. Something in the scent or the image seemed to satisfy him because he looked up at Marcus with an expression that conveyed volumes, grief, hope, and the desperate need to complete an unfinished mission. Show me, boy, Marcus whispered. Show me what Danny Sullivan was investigating. Thor turned and trotted toward the house with purposeful strides, looking back to ensure Marcus was following. They circled the building's perimeter, the dog stopping at specific points to paw at the ground or sniff particular areas. At the back of the house, partially concealed by overgrown shrubs, Thor led Marcus to a small basement window where the glass had been broken from the inside. Through the gap, Marcus could see into a darkness that his military-trained instincts told him was deliberately concealed. The basement wasn't just storage. It had been modified, expanded, turned into something that made his skin crawl with recognition. As they completed their reconnaissance, a black SUV pulled into the Thompson driveway. Marcus recognized Bobby Mitchell's vehicle immediately, along with 2 other men he didn't know. Large, professional-looking individuals who moved with the calculated awareness of hired security. Thor's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. The dog positioned himself between Marcus and the approaching men, every line of his body screaming threat assessment and protection protocol. Well, well, Bobby called out, his voice carrying false joviality across the snow. Looks like our Good Samaritan has made a new friend. That's a beautiful animal, Marcus. Reminds me of the K9 units we used to work with in the police department. The 2 other men flanked Bobby, their winter coats bulky enough to conceal weapons. Marcus felt the familiar weight of his concealed carry pistol in calculated distances, cover options, escape routes, all the tactical thinking that had kept him alive in hostile territory. Just checking on the dog, Marcus replied carefully. Weather's getting bad. Thought he might need shelter. Thoughtful of you, Bobby said, his smile never reaching his eyes. But this property is private, Marcus. The new owner wouldn't appreciate trespassers, even well-meaning ones. New owner? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Mitchell Construction recently acquired this property for development, Bobby said smoothly. Planning to build affordable housing for struggling families. You know how I feel about helping children in need. The words dripped with irony that made Marcus's stomach turn. Here was a man who spoke of helping children while potentially orchestrating their disappearance. The cognitive dissonance was staggering, the kind of compartmentalization that allowed monsters to function in normal society. Thor's growling intensified, his training recognizing the threat these men represented. The dog's loyalty had kept him here for 3 years, maintaining evidence of crimes that powerful people wanted to remain buried. "We should all get inside," Bobby continued, his tone becoming more insistent. "This storm's going to be a killer." "Why don't you come back to town with us, Marcus? Leave the dog to find his own shelter." The suggestion felt like a trap wrapped in concern. Marcus looked down at Thor, seeing in those amber eyes the same desperate determination he'd witnessed in military working dogs who refused to abandon their posts even under enemy fire. "Thanks for the offer," Marcus said, backing away slowly. "But I think I'll head home on foot. Good exercise." "I insist," Bobby said, and now his 2 companions were moving to flank Marcus more aggressively. Weather like this, a man could get lost, freeze to death. Terrible thing to happen to a veteran who's already lost so much. The threat was clear, delivered with the casual menace of a man accustomed to having his suggestions followed. Marcus felt Thor press against his leg, the dog's warmth and solid presence providing an anchor in a situation spiraling toward violence. In that moment, Marcus made a choice that would define everything that followed. Instead of backing down, instead of accepting Bobby's offer and walking away from the truth, he looked directly into the businessman's cold gray eyes. "You know what, Bobby? I think I'll stay right here with Thor. Old soldier's intuition tells me this dog is exactly where he needs to be." The mask slipped from Bobby's face for just an instant, revealing something predatory and calculating beneath the community leader facade. Then the smile returned, but now it carried the promise of consequences. "Your choice, Marcus. But choices have consequences in small towns like ours. I'd hate for anything unfortunate to happen to a respected veteran." As Bobby and his men drove away, Marcus knelt beside Thor in the swirling snow, both of them understanding that the real mission was just beginning. The blizzard struck Glacier Falls with the fury of an Arctic apocalypse, transforming the small Montana town into a frozen wasteland where visibility dropped to mere feet, and the wind howled like the voices of the damned. Marcus had barely made it back to his cabin before the full force of the storm hit, Thor padding silently beside him through knee-deep snow that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. Inside the warmth of his modest home, Marcus watched the German Shepherd explore with the methodical precision of a trained investigator. Thor sniffed every corner, every piece of furniture, his behavior suggesting he was cataloging scents and memorizing the layout with professional thoroughness. When the dog finally settled by the fireplace, his amber eyes remained alert, focused on the windows facing the Thompson property. "You're still on duty, aren't you, boy?" Marcus murmured, offering Thor a bowl of warm broth he'd heated on the stove. 3 years of waiting, and you haven't given up the mission." The electricity flickered ominously as wind gusts rattled the cabin's windows. Marcus checked his emergency supplies. Battery-powered radio, flashlights, enough canned food to last a week if necessary. The storm was predicted to rage for at least 48 hours, effectively cutting off Glacier Falls from the outside world. No sheriff's deputies could reach them, no federal agents could respond to calls for help. They were completely isolated with whatever secrets Bobby Mitchell was protecting. Martha Henderson's voice crackled over the ham radio she'd insisted Marcus keep for emergencies. "Marcus, honey, you and that dog hunker down tight. Frank's got his police scanner going, and there's been some concerning chatter on the emergency frequencies. Marcus keyed the microphone. What kind of chatter, Martha? Talk about package transfers and weather window operations. Doesn't sound like normal storm preparation to me. Frank Patterson's voice joined the conversation. Marcus, I've been thinking about Bobby's reaction today. That wasn't the behavior of an innocent man. He's planning something, and this storm provides perfect cover. The implications chilled Marcus more than the Arctic wind. If Bobby was involved in child trafficking, the isolation created by the blizzard would give him 48 hours to move evidence, relocate victims, or eliminate witnesses. The perfect crime committed under nature's cover. Thor suddenly stood at attention, his ears perked toward sounds only he could detect. Through the howling wind, Marcus caught the distant rumble of heavy machinery, unusual for the middle of a blizzard unless someone had urgent business that couldn't wait for clear weather. Martha, Frank, are you hearing engine noise? Sounds like construction equipment. Affirmative, Frank replied grimly, coming from the direction of the Thompson property. Who operates heavy machinery in weather like this, unless they're trying to bury something deep? Marcus felt his military training kick in, the familiar mental shift from civilian to soldier that had kept him alive through 2 combat deployments. We need visual confirmation. I'm going to attempt reconnaissance. Marcus, no! Martha's voice carried the authority of a woman who'd raised 5 children and buried 3 husbands. That's suicide in this weather. Wind chills already -40. Then it's perfect cover, Marcus replied, suiting up in his heaviest winter gear. Thor and I have been through worse weather in Afghanistan, haven't we, boy? Thor's tail wagged once, and Marcus swore he saw understanding in those intelligent amber eyes. This dog had been trained for exactly this kind of mission: surveillance, reconnaissance, evidence gathering in hostile conditions. The journey to the Thompson property took nearly an hour through snow that reached Marcus's waist in places. Thor proved invaluable, using his superior senses to navigate around hidden obstacles and unstable drifts. The dog moved with the confidence of an animal that had traversed this terrain countless times, leading Marcus along paths that provided maximum concealment. As they approached the house, the sound of machinery became deafening even through the storm's roar. Massive floodlights illuminated a surreal scene that made Marcus's blood run cold. 3 excavators worked frantically in the blizzard, their operators bundled in Arctic gear, digging what appeared to be an enormous grave behind the house. But it wasn't a grave they were digging. It was a tunnel entrance leading down into an underground complex that stretched far beyond the property's visible boundaries. Marcus counted at least 12 workers, all moving with military precision despite the horrific weather conditions. This wasn't an emergency operation. This was a carefully planned evacuation. Through his military-grade binoculars, Marcus watched Bobby Mitchell coordinating the operation from inside a heated command trailer. The businessman was dressed in expensive winter gear and spoke into multiple radios, his demeanor suggesting someone accustomed to managing complex logistics under pressure. Thor pressed against Marcus's leg, vibrating with controlled tension. The dog's training was screaming at him to apprehend suspects, to protect potential victims, but his discipline held him in place. Marcus felt the same conflict. Every instinct demanded immediate action, but tactical wisdom counseled patience and proper intelligence gathering. That's when Marcus saw them, shadows moving through the tunnels, small figures being herded by larger ones. Even through the swirling snow and limited visibility, the body language was unmistakable. Children, moving in the resigned shuffle of long-term captives, being relocated under the storm's cover. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. How many kids are down there? Thor's low whine carried volumes of frustrated urgency. This dog had been watching this operation for 3 years, had seen Agent Danny Sullivan die trying to expose it, had maintained his vigil waiting for someone with the authority and capability to complete the mission. Marcus keyed his radio with numb fingers. Martha, Frank, I need you to document everything I'm about to tell you. Write it down, date it, sign it. If something happens to me, this information needs to reach federal authorities. Marcus, what are you seeing? Frank's voice carried the tension of a man preparing for terrible news. Underground complex, major excavation operation, approximately 12 to 15 workers, and... Marcus paused, forcing himself to speak the unspeakable truth. Children. Frank. Multiple children being moved through underground tunnels. The radio silence stretched for long seconds before Martha's voice returned, thick with emotion. How many children, honey? I can't get an accurate count in these conditions, but at least 6 that I can confirm visually. Could be many more. Frank's response carried the authority of a man who'd spent his career protecting children. Marcus, we're calling this in to every federal agency we can reach. Storm or no storm, this ends tonight. Negative, Marcus replied, watching the operation continue with clockwork efficiency. By the time help arrives, they'll be gone. This is clearly a relocation operation timed to coincide with the storm. By tomorrow morning, this place will look like it never existed. Through his binoculars, Marcus saw Bobby Mitchell emerge from the command trailer, speaking animatedly into his radio. Even at this distance, the businessman's body language suggested urgency, possibly panic. Had someone detected their surveillance? Thor's hackles rose, and he turned toward the forest behind them. Marcus heard it too, the sound of snowmobiles approaching through the trees. Bobby's security team moving to investigate or eliminate witnesses. We're blown, Marcus whispered into his radio. Going dark for radio silence. If you don't hear from me in 6 hours, assume the worst and contact every federal agency you can reach. Marcus switched off his radio and looked down at Thor, seeing his own determination reflected in those amber eyes. Well, boy, looks like we're about to complete Agent Sullivan's mission the hard way. The German shepherd's tail wagged once, and Marcus swore he could hear Danny Sullivan's voice in the wind, urging them forward into the storm and whatever horrors lay beneath the frozen ground of Glacier Falls. Behind them, the sound of pursuing snowmobiles grew louder, while ahead, the lights of the excavation operation continued their grim work. Marcus and Thor were caught between Bobby Mitchell's security forces and the evidence of crimes that had destroyed countless families. But Marcus had spent his entire adult life in situations where retreat wasn't an option and the mission came before personal safety. Thor had maintained his vigil for 3 years, never abandoning his post despite injury, hunger, and the endless Montana winters. Together, they represented the last hope for children whose voices had been silenced by greed and corruption. The storm that was meant to provide perfect cover for Bobby Mitchell's operation had instead delivered the 2 witnesses who would ensure that Danny Sullivan's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. As they moved deeper into the blizzard toward an uncertain confrontation, Marcus felt a peace he hadn't known since Danny's death. Finally, after years of aimless grief, he had found a mission worthy of his son's memory. The snowmobiles closed in like mechanical wolves, their headlights cutting through the blizzard in sweeping arcs that illuminated the hellish scene unfolding at the Thompson property. Marcus counted at least 4 machines, each carrying armed men who moved with the practiced efficiency of professional security contractors. Bobby Mitchell's voice crackled across their radio frequencies, his calm commands betraying the desperation of a man whose carefully constructed empire was crumbling. Marcus and Thor took cover behind a massive fallen pine, its snow-laden branches providing concealment from both the pursuing security team and the excavation crews below. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched the underground operation with growing horror. What he'd initially taken for a simple tunnel system was actually an elaborate complex that stretched beneath several properties, complete with ventilation systems, electrical power, and multiple escape routes. The children moved through the tunnels like ghosts, their small forms bundled in blankets, shepherded by adults whose faces were hidden behind winter masks. Marcus counted at least 12 victims, ranging in age from what appeared to be 6 years old to mid-teens. Their behavior spoke of long-term conditioning. No crying, no resistance, the resigned compliance of spirits that had been systematically broken. Thor's training as a federal canine was evident in every fiber of his being. The dog's muscles coiled with barely contained energy, his amber eyes tracking multiple targets simultaneously, calculating angles of attack and protective positions. This was an animal bred and trained to apprehend dangerous criminals, and every instinct screamed at him to complete the mission that had cost his handler's life. The first snowmobile rounded their position, its rider scanning the area with military-grade night vision equipment. Marcus recognized the tactical gear, expensive equipment that suggested Bobby Mitchell's operation had significant financial backing and possibly federal connections. These weren't local, hired muscle. These were professionals accustomed to eliminating problems with surgical precision. "Control, this is Reaper 1, the rider spoke into his helmet microphone. "No visual on the targets, but we have fresh tracks leading toward the primary site. Recommend we expand the search perimeter." Bobby Mitchell's response carried across the radio waves with chilling clarity. "Negative, Reaper 1. We have a timeline to maintain. If the targets surface, eliminate them. But priority 1 is package relocation. We cannot afford delays." The term packages made Marcus's stomach turn. These people had reduced children to inventory, cargo to be moved and managed like any other commodity. The dehumanization was complete, allowing them to commit atrocities while maintaining the psychological distance necessary to function in normal society. Thor pressed closer against Marcus, the dog's body heat providing warmth against the -40 wind chill. In that moment of shared warmth, Marcus felt an overwhelming connection to this animal who had maintained his vigil for 3 years, who had witnessed unspeakable horrors and never abandoned his post. The dog represented everything noble about service and sacrifice, qualities that seemed to have been corrupted or forgotten by too many humans. The excavation operation below continued with mechanical precision. Massive generators powered floodlights that turned the worksite into a surreal theater of criminal efficiency. Workers loaded equipment onto heavy trucks, while others systematically destroyed evidence, burning documents, dismantling computer systems, erasing 3 years of meticulous criminal enterprise. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched Bobby Mitchell coordinate the evacuation from his heated command trailer. The businessman moved between multiple radio frequencies, coordinating what appeared to be several simultaneous operations across the region. This wasn't just about the Thompson property. This was the dismantling of an entire network that had operated with impunity for years. "All units, this is Control." Bobby's voice carried a new urgency. "Weather window is closing faster than anticipated. Accelerate package transfer to secondary sites. Initiate Protocol 7 for evidence disposal. Protocol 7. Marcus's military experience told him that numbered protocols usually escalated in severity, and if this was Protocol 7, he didn't want to imagine what Protocols 8, 9, and 10 entailed. The children were running out of time, and once they disappeared into whatever secondary sites Bobby had prepared, they might never be found again. Frank Patterson's voice suddenly crackled through Marcus's radio, barely audible through the storm interference. "Marcus, if you can hear this, we've managed to reach federal authorities. FBI tactical team is en route, but they're fighting the same storm you are. Estimated arrival time 4 hours minimum." 4 hours. By then, Bobby's operation would be completed, the evidence destroyed, the victims relocated to new hiding places. The storm that was supposed to provide perfect cover for the criminals had also trapped the only law enforcement response capable of stopping them. Marcus made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff into an abyss. He couldn't wait for federal backup. He couldn't allow these children to disappear into an even deeper nightmare. Sometimes a soldier's duty required action regardless of odds, regardless of personal cost. "Thor," he whispered, looking into those intelligent amber eyes. "Agent Sullivan trained you to protect innocent people, didn't he? This is what he died for, boy. This is why you've been waiting." The German shepherd's tail wagged once, and Marcus saw understanding pass between them. They were about to attempt something that violated every principle of tactical wisdom. A two-man assault on a fortified position defended by professional security forces. But sometimes the impossible mission was the only moral choice. The first snowmobile passed their position, its rider focused on the search pattern ahead. Marcus counted heartbeats, timing his movement to the rhythm of the storm's gusts that would mask their approach. Thor moved with him, the dog's training allowing them to function as a coordinated team, despite never having worked together before. They approached the excavation site from the upwind side, using the blizzard's fury to mask their advance. The security perimeter was focused outward, watching for threats approaching from the forest, not expecting an assault from the direction of the main operation. Marcus reached the edge of the excavation area and looked down into a scene that would haunt his dreams forever. The underground complex was vast, obviously constructed over years with the kind of resources that only significant criminal enterprise could provide. Multiple chambers connected by reinforced tunnels, each room serving a specific function in the systematic abuse and trafficking of children. In the closest chamber, Marcus could see the victims more clearly, children whose faces carried the hollow-eyed resignation of long-term trauma. Some appeared to be drugged, moving with the sluggish compliance of chemical sedation. Others seemed alert but broken, their spirits crushed by experiences no child should endure. Thor's low growl vibrated against Marcus's leg, the dog's every instinct screaming for immediate action. This was what federal K-9 units trained for, the protection of innocent people from predators who hid behind wealth, position, and carefully constructed facades of respectability. Bobby Mitchell emerged from the command trailer, surveying his operation with the satisfaction of a man whose plans were proceeding on schedule. Even through the swirling snow, Marcus could see the businessman's expression, cold calculation mixed with something that might have been genuine grief for his own lost daughter, emotions compartmentalized in a way that allowed him to destroy other families while mourning his own loss. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Marcus and Thor faced impossible odds against professional killers, but the alternative was allowing evil to triumph through inaction. Sometimes courage wasn't about expecting victory. Sometimes it was simply about refusing to let innocent people suffer while you had the power to act. In the howling wind of the Montana blizzard, a disabled veteran and a faithful dog prepared to complete a mission that had begun with the death of an FBI agent and would end with either justice or their own sacrifice. Marcus and Thor descended into the excavation site like avenging angels wrapped in Arctic fury, the blizzard masking their approach until they were among the work crews before anyone realized the perimeter had been breached. The element of surprise lasted exactly 37 seconds, long enough for Marcus to disable 2 guards with his military combat training and for Thor to demonstrate why German Shepherds were the preferred breed for federal law enforcement. The dog moved with lethal precision, his K-9 training directing him to neutralize threats without killing unless absolutely necessary. Thor's first target went down screaming as 70 pounds of muscle and determination clamped onto his weapon arm, forcing him to drop his rifle into the snow. The second guard managed to draw his sidearm before Thor's momentum carried them both into the excavation pit, where they disappeared in a tangle of snarling fury and terrified shouts. "Contacts at the primary site!" Bobby Mitchell's voice exploded across the radio frequencies. "All units converge on excavation zone. Shoot to kill, repeat, shoot to kill. Marcus fought his way toward the tunnel entrance, using construction equipment as cover, while automatic weapons fire erupted around him. Bullets sparked off metal surfaces and thudded into wooden pallets, the sharp cracks of gunfire creating a deadly percussion against the storm's howling symphony. His military training took over completely, muscle memory from countless firefights in Afghanistan guiding his movements while his conscious mind focused on the mission objective. The children were still in the tunnels, still at the mercy of Bobby's organization, and every second of delay increased their chances of disappearing forever into the nightmare network that stretched across 3 states. Marcus fought through the security perimeter not for glory or vengeance, but for the simple moral imperative that innocent lives mattered more than his own safety. Thor reappeared from the excavation pit, his muzzle bloody, but his amber eyes blazing with the righteous fury of a protector fulfilling his ultimate purpose. The dog had neutralized his opponent and now bounded through the chaos toward Marcus, weaving between gunfire with the supernatural agility that made military working dogs legendary among soldiers who'd seen them in action. "Down here!" Marcus shouted over the gunfire, pointing toward the tunnel entrance where Bobby Mitchell had disappeared with several of his security team. "The packages, Thor! We've got to get to the packages!" The German shepherd understood immediately, his federal training recognizing the tactical terminology. Thor charged toward the tunnel entrance with Marcus close behind, both of them racing against time and overwhelming odds to reach the children before Bobby's evacuation was complete. The underground complex was a monument to systematic evil, climate-controlled chambers connected by reinforced concrete corridors, complete with living areas, medical facilities, and recording equipment that suggested the horrors inflicted here had been documented for distribution to other predators. Emergency lighting cast sickly shadows on walls lined with photographs. Hundreds of children over the years, their faces capturing the progression from hope to despair as they were broken by their captors. Marcus found the first group of children in a chamber that had been designed to look like a comfortable dormitory, complete with bunk beds and children's toys. But the locks on the doors and bars on the windows revealed the true nature of this place. 6 children, ranging in age from 7 to 14, huddled together in terror as their captors prepared to move them to vehicles waiting in the storm above. "Federal agent!" Marcus shouted, though he had no official authority and no backup coming through the blizzard. "Release the children and surrender!" Bobby Mitchell emerged from the shadows, no longer the affable businessman, but revealed as the predator he'd always been beneath the community leader facade. His expensive winter gear was stained with mud and something darker, his gray eyes reflecting the cold calculation of a man who'd already committed too many crimes to stop now. "Marcus Sullivan?" Bobby said with genuine sadness, as if mourning a friend rather than confronting an enemy. "You should have taken my advice and stayed home with your grief. Some stones are better left unturned, some truths better left buried. These children have families, Bobby. People who love them, who are searching for them. Families who failed them." Bobby's voice cracked with the passion of a true believer. "Do you know what I've seen in 15 years of this work? Parents who sell their children for drug money, foster systems that place innocents with monsters, a society that talks about protecting children while creating the very conditions that make them vulnerable." Thor positioned himself between Marcus and the children, his training recognizing the tactical situation. The dog's presence seemed to calm the victims, their trauma-conditioned fear momentarily overcome by the instinctive recognition that this animal represented protection rather than threat. "My Emma was taken from a loving home," Bobby continued, his voice now carrying the weight of 15 years of accumulated grief and rage. "Stolen by predators while we were camping, while I was supposed to be protecting her. The system failed her. The FBI failed her. Everyone failed her." Marcus felt a chill of recognition as pieces of the puzzle fell into place. So you decided to become what you hated most? I decided to become what was necessary, Bobby shouted, spittle flying from his lips. These children were already lost, Marcus, already abandoned by families too poor, too addicted, too broken to protect them. I gave them structure, purpose, safety from a world that would have destroyed them anyway. The rationalization was complete. The psychological compartmentalization that allowed a grieving father to become the very monster that had destroyed his own family. Bobby had convinced himself that his crimes were actually acts of salvation, that the systematic abuse of children was somehow a form of protection from an even crueler world. "Emma's still alive, isn't she?" Marcus asked, seeing the truth in Bobby's eyes. "That's what this is really about. You're not saving these children, you're trading them for your daughter." Bobby's facade cracked completely, revealing the desperate father beneath the criminal mastermind. 15 years, Marcus. 15 years of following every lead, paying every ransom, doing whatever was necessary to bring my baby home. The man who took her wanted a steady supply in exchange for her eventual return. What would you have done? What would any father do? The moral complexity hit Marcus like a physical blow. Bobby Mitchell wasn't evil in the traditional sense. He was a father so consumed by love for his own child that he'd sacrificed other children to save her. The tragedy was complete. A good man transformed into a monster by the same parental love that made him human. Thor's growl intensified as more security personnel approached through the tunnels. Time was running out, and the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Marcus could hear vehicle engines above, suggesting Bobby's evacuation was proceeding despite the firefight that had erupted around the excavation site. "Where is she, Bobby?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice calm despite the approaching danger. "Where is Emma?" "Safe," Bobby whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Finally safe after 15 years of hell. But only if these packages reach their destination. Only if the exchange is completed." The children watched this adult conversation with the resigned patience of victims who'd learned that their fate was decided by forces beyond their control. They were merchandise in a transaction they couldn't understand, pawns in a game that had consumed the lives of everyone involved. Marcus made the hardest decision of his life. Instead of judging Bobby Mitchell, instead of treating him as the enemy, he chose to see him as what he truly was, another victim of the same evil that had destroyed both their families. "Help me end this, Bobby," Marcus said quietly. "Help me break the cycle. Your Emma can still come home, but not like this. Not by sacrificing other people's children." For one impossible moment, Marcus saw the real Bobby Mitchell. The loving father who'd coached Little League and organized charity drives. The man who'd been broken by loss and twisted by desperation into something unrecognizable. In that moment, redemption seemed possible. Then the security team arrived, and Bobby's face hardened back into the mask of the criminal mastermind who'd built an empire on the suffering of innocents. "I'm sorry, Marcus," Bobby said, raising his weapon, "but some prices are worth paying. Even this one." The confrontation that would determine the fate of a dozen children was about to begin in the depths of a Montana blizzard, with only a disabled veteran and a faithful dog standing between evil and its final victory. The gunshot that changed everything came not from Bobby Mitchell's weapon, but from Frank Patterson's ancient hunting rifle. The 71-year-old retired teacher had somehow navigated the blizzard on foot, arriving at the excavation site just as Bobby's finger tightened on the trigger. Frank's shot went wide, his arthritic hand shaking from cold and adrenaline, but the sound was enough to startle Bobby into hesitation. "Nobody else dies today." Frank's voice cracked with the authority of a man who'd spent 40 years protecting children. "I've seen enough death, enough suffering. This ends now." In that moment of distraction, Thor exploded into action with the lethal precision of his federal training. The German Shepherd launched himself at Bobby's weapon hand, 70 pounds of muscle and determination driving the businessman backward into the concrete wall. The pistol flew from Bobby's grasp, clattering across the floor as man and dog crashed into surveillance equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Marcus moved simultaneously, his military training taking over as he advanced on Bobby's security team. But as he reached for his own weapon, a child's voice stopped him cold. "Daddy?" The word came from behind him, spoken in a woman's voice that carried the innocent confusion of someone whose mind had been frozen in time. "Daddy, why are there strangers in our home?" Marcus turned to see a woman in her early 20s standing in the tunnel entrance, her blonde hair styled in pigtails that belonged on a much younger child. Her clothing was expensive but childish, pastel colors and cartoon characters that created a disturbing contrast with her adult features. This was Emma Mitchell, kept alive for 15 years but psychologically trapped at the age of 8 when she'd been taken. Bobby's face transformed with a love so pure and desperate it was heartbreaking to witness. "Emma, sweetheart, everything's okay. Daddy's just talking to some new friends. Why don't you go back to your room while Daddy finishes his work?" "But Daddy," Emma said with the petulant tone of a child who sensed adult tension, "you promised we were going on a trip today. You promised we were finally going to leave this place and live somewhere with sunshine." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Bobby had been telling the truth. Emma was alive, but she'd been so thoroughly psychologically conditioned that she believed her captor was her protector. The Stockholm Syndrome was complete, reinforced by 15 years of isolation and manipulation. "She doesn't remember," Bobby whispered, his voice breaking. "She doesn't remember me, doesn't remember our old life, but she's alive, Marcus. After 15 years of hell, my baby girl is alive." Thor maintained his grip on Bobby's weapon arm, but his amber eyes were fixed on Emma with the protective instinct that made German Shepherds legendary family dogs. Even in this chaotic situation, the dog recognized an innocent who needed protection, regardless of the complex web of trauma and manipulation that surrounded her. "Mr. Bobby," one of the captured children spoke up, a boy of perhaps 10, whose voice carried the weary wisdom of someone forced to grow up too fast. "Are we really going home today? You promised our families would be waiting." The question shattered Bobby's carefully constructed rationalization. These weren't packages or inventory. They were children who still believed in promises, who still hoped for reunion with families that may or may not still be searching for them. The businessman's face crumpled as the full weight of his crimes crashed down upon him. "I told myself I was protecting you," Bobby whispered to the children. "I told myself your families had failed you, that you were better off here than in foster care or with parents who couldn't keep you safe. But the truth is, I became the very monster I was trying to defeat." Frank Patterson approached slowly, his hunting rifle lowered but ready. At 71, the retired teacher moved with the careful dignity of a man whose body was failing, but whose moral compass remained true. "Bobby, son, there's still time to make this right. These children can still go home. Emma can still heal." 15 years, Bobby replied, looking at his daughter who no longer knew him. 15 years of believing that if I just did enough, sacrificed enough, paid enough. But she's not my Emma anymore. She's someone else's creation, programmed to see her kidnapper as her savior. Emma stepped closer to Bobby, with the trusting innocence of a child seeking comfort from a parent. "Daddy, why is everyone so sad? Did I do something wrong?" The heartbreak in that question was unbearable. This woman had been robbed of her childhood, her adolescence, her chance to grow into the person she was meant to become. Instead, she'd been frozen in psychological amber, trapped at age 8 while her body grew into adulthood. Marcus holstered his weapon, recognizing that violence wasn't the answer to this tragedy. "Bobby, listen to me. I lost my son too. I know what grief can do to a man, how it can twist love into something destructive. But these children still have a chance at real families, real lives." "And Emma?" Bobby asked, his voice barely audible. "What happens to Emma when she learns the truth about what I've done? When she realizes the man she calls Daddy is actually the monster who destroyed these other families?" The moral complexity was staggering. Emma had been a victim for 15 years, but she was also evidence of Bobby's crimes. Returning her to society would require deprogramming that might destroy what little psychological stability she'd managed to maintain. Yet keeping her isolated perpetuated the very abuse that had created this situation. Thor released Bobby's arm and moved to stand beside Emma, his training recognizing someone who needed protection regardless of the circumstances. The German shepherd's presence seemed to calm her, and she reached down to stroke his fur with the unconscious affection of someone who genuinely loved animals. "He's beautiful," Emma said with childlike wonder. "Can we keep him, Daddy? I've always wanted a dog." The irony was crushing. Thor had spent 3 years waiting to complete the mission that would expose Bobby's crimes. And now Emma, Bobby's own daughter and the ultimate victim, was asking to keep the very dog who would ensure her father's downfall. Frank Patterson's radio crackled with Martha Henderson's voice. "Frank, honey, the FBI helicopters are finally getting through the storm. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. Whatever's happening down there, help is almost here." Bobby heard the transmission and closed his eyes, the weight of 15 years of crime and desperation finally overwhelming him. "It's over," he whispered. "All of it. The network, the operation, everything I built to bring Emma home. It's all over." "It doesn't have to end with more suffering," Marcus said gently. "Help us help these children. Help us help Emma. You can still choose to be the father she needs, rather than the monster she doesn't remember." For a moment that stretched like eternity, Bobby Mitchell stood at the crossroads between damnation and redemption. The children watched him with eyes that had seen too much. Emma hummed softly while petting Thor, and Frank Patterson kept his rifle ready, but pointed at the floor. Then Bobby reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small device that looked like a garage door opener. "Dead man's switch," he explained quietly. "If I release this button, explosives throughout the complex will detonate. Insurance, you might say, against the day when everything fell apart." Emma looked up from Thor with confusion. "Daddy, what's that thing? Are we playing a game?" The question broke Bobby completely. Here was his daughter, innocent despite 15 years of captivity, asking about a device that could kill them all. The father who had committed countless crimes to save her was now threatening her life to avoid consequences. "No, sweetheart," Bobby said, tears streaming down his face. "We're not playing a game. Daddy just has to make sure you're safe, no matter what happens." Thor positioned himself protectively in front of Emma, and Marcus saw the intelligence in those amber eyes. The dog understood the threat and was prepared to sacrifice himself to protect the innocent woman who reminded him of all the children he'd been trained to serve. In the tunnels above them, the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, bringing federal agents who would end this nightmare, but might also trigger the final tragedy if Bobby chose destruction over surrender. The moment of ultimate choice had arrived in the depths of a Montana blizzard, where a father's love had become indistinguishable from evil itself. Dear friends, as we reach the heart of Marcus and Thor's incredible journey, I want to pause and speak directly to those of you who understand the weight of loss, the power of second chances, and the unbreakable bonds that define our lives. Many of you have faced your own winters, the loss of children, the end of marriages, the quiet desperation of feeling forgotten by a world that moves too fast. Marcus found his purpose not in isolation, but in protecting others, just as Thor never abandoned his faithful watch. Sometimes our greatest pain becomes the foundation for our most meaningful mission. The love we carry for those we've lost doesn't have to end in bitterness. It can transform into service, into protection for others who need our strength. Every grandparent reading this knows the fierce love that would move mountains for a child's safety. That love doesn't diminish with age, it deepens with wisdom. Thor waited 3 years for someone to complete the mission. Perhaps you've been waiting too, for purpose, for meaning, for the chance to matter again. Your experience, your heart, your willingness to act when others turn away, these are the gifts that can still change everything. What mission has been waiting for you to complete? How has your own loss prepared you to protect others? In the suffocating darkness of the underground complex, with Bobby Mitchell's finger poised over the dead man's switch and the sound of FBI helicopters growing closer above, Marcus made a choice that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. Instead of rushing forward with military aggression, instead of trying to disarm Bobby through force, he did something that caught everyone, including himself, completely off guard. He knelt down and began to speak to Emma as if she were indeed the 8-year-old child her mind believed her to be. "Emma, sweetheart," Marcus said gently, his voice carrying the same tone he'd used when reading bedtime stories to his own Danny years ago. "My name is Marcus, and I'm here because a very special dog named Thor asked me to help keep you safe." "Would you like to hear about Thor's job?" Emma's eyes lit up with childlike curiosity, and she looked down at the German shepherd who sat patiently beside her. "Thor has a job, like grown-ups do?" "The most important job in the world," Marcus continued, watching Bobby's face as understanding dawned. "Thor's job is to protect children like you. He's been working very hard for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to make sure you're safe." Bobby's hand trembled on the detonator, his entire worldview cracking as he watched a stranger show his daughter the same gentle patience he remembered giving her 15 years ago. This was how a real father spoke to a beloved child, not with the controlling manipulation of a captor, but with the respectful love that nurtures growth and independence. Frank Patterson understood Marcus's strategy immediately. The retired teacher stepped closer, his grandfatherly presence adding another layer of authentic care that contrasted sharply with the institutionalized control Emma had known for 15 years. "Emma, honey," Frank said softly, "would you like to help Thor with his job? He's been working alone for a very long time, and he could use a friend like you." Emma looked between the adults with the confusion of someone whose carefully constructed world was shifting in ways she couldn't understand. For 15 years, Bobby had been her entire universe. Protector, provider, the only constant in a life defined by isolation and control. Now suddenly there were new people offering different kinds of relationships, different possibilities. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice carrying the first notes of adult awareness breaking through the childlike facade. "Mr. Bobby, you said we were the only ones who cared about each other. You said the outside world was dangerous." Bobby's face contorted with anguish as he heard his own words reflected back, the lies he'd told himself and her to justify their imprisonment. "Emma, I wanted to protect you. I wanted to keep you safe from people who might hurt you." "But these people don't seem dangerous," Emma observed with the innocent clarity that often cuts through adult deception. "They're being kind to Thor, and they're being kind to me. Why would kind people be dangerous?" The question hung in the air like a revelation. Here was a woman whose mind had been trapped at age 8, yet whose heart still recognized genuine kindness when she encountered it. Despite 15 years of psychological manipulation, some essential part of Emma Mitchell remained unbroken. Thor rose from his position and walked slowly to Bobby, his amber eyes holding none of the aggressive posture from their earlier confrontation. Instead, the German Shepherd displayed the same gentle approach he might use with a traumatized child, recognizing that Bobby too was a victim of the same evil that had destroyed so many lives. "He knows, doesn't he?" Bobby whispered, looking down at Thor. "This dog knows I'm not the monster. He knows I'm just a father who lost his way." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he watched the psychological breakthrough unfold. "Bobby, you spent 15 years trying to save Emma, but she was never really lost. Look at her. She's still loving, still trusting, still capable of recognizing goodness when she sees it. That's not the product of captivity. That's the foundation you built in her first 8 years of life." The sound of helicopters was now deafening, and voices echoed down from the excavation site above as FBI tactical teams established their perimeter. But in this underground chamber, a different kind of rescue was taking place, the salvation of souls rather than bodies. Emma approached Bobby with the deliberate steps of someone making a momentous decision. "Mr. Bobby, I've been having dreams lately. Dreams of a different daddy, someone who looked like you but younger, someone who pushed me on swings and taught me to ride a bicycle. Were those real memories, trying to come back?" Bobby's grip on the detonator loosened as 15 years of carefully suppressed truth crashed over him. "Yes, sweetheart, those were real. That was your real daddy before everything went wrong. And these other children," Emma continued, looking at the victims who had watched this entire exchange with growing hope. "They have real daddies and mommies too, don't they? People who've been dreaming about them the way I dream about bicycle lessons?" The moral architecture of Bobby's rationalization crumbled completely. He looked at the children he'd convinced himself he was protecting, saw them with Emma's innocent clarity, and finally understood the magnitude of what he'd done. These weren't packages or inventory. They were someone's most precious treasure, just as Emma had once been his. "Federal agents!" The voice from above was professional but urgent. "We have the building surrounded. Come out with your hands visible, and no one needs to get hurt." Bobby looked at the detonator in his hand, then at Emma's trusting face, then at the children whose lives hung in the balance. For 15 years, he'd told himself that love justified any action, any crime, any betrayal of moral law. Now he saw that real love sometimes required the hardest choice of all: letting go. "Emma," he said quietly, "would you like to go outside and see the sunshine?" "Real sunshine, not the artificial lights we've lived with for so long?" Emma's face broke into a smile that transformed her from a psychologically frozen child into glimpses of the woman she might still become. "Can Thor come with us? Can the other children come too?" "Yes, sweetheart. Everyone comes. Everyone goes home." Bobby Mitchell placed the detonator carefully on the floor and raised his hands in surrender. Not to the FBI agents waiting above, but to the truth he'd spent 15 years running from. That love without freedom isn't love at all. It's just another form of prison. As they began the long journey toward the surface, toward justice and healing and the chance for genuine redemption, Thor took his place beside Emma. The faithful German shepherd, who had waited 3 years to complete his mission, had done something more important than solving a case. He'd helped heal the heart of a father who had lost his way in the darkness of grief. The blizzard was finally breaking above them, and for the first time in 15 years, Emma Mitchell was going to see real sunshine on her face.